There's a certain kind of person who moves through the world quietly, as if listening for something most people can't hear. They don't rush, they don't compete for attention. Instead, they drift through life collecting moments the way others collect things, the way shadows fold across a wall, the way a stranger hesitates before smiling, the way memories return when the world is silent. These are the reflective ones, the ones who feel the weight of existence even on ordinary days. They think deeply, not out of habit, but out of instinct. Their mind has its own gravity, pulling everything inward for examination. They see layers inside layers. They hear meaning behind words. And they often notice beauty in places most people walk past without a second glance. But being someone who feels life so intensely is both a gift and a burden. Because while their inner world is rich, their outer world rarely understands the quiet intensity with which they experience everything. For them, thinking isn't something that happens, it's something that is. They don't just move through life. They analyze it, decode it, try to understand the architecture behind every feeling, every choice, every relationship. A simple afternoon walk turns into a philosophical exploration. A memory becomes a puzzle. A fleeting emotion becomes a doorway into something deeper. And behind all of this is a brain that's constantly weaving meaning, connecting the abstract with the tangible. Psychologists call this high reflective awareness, a tendency to examine inner experiences as if holding them under a microscope. It's tied to the same network in the brain that activates during imagination, creativity, and introspection. For deep thinkers, this network rarely rests. But this ability to see beneath the surface comes with a cost. While most people live on the edges of their thoughts, deep thinkers live at the center of them. They pause before they speak, they observe before they react, and by the time they're ready to join a conversation, it is usually moved on. So they stay silent. People mistake that silence for shyness or detachment or disinterest. But it's none of those. It's simply the time they need to align their inner world with the outer one. They hunger for meaningful conversations. Not the surface-level exchanges society loves so much, but real dialogue about purpose, fear, identity, stories, the things that make us human, the things worth staying awake for. But depth comes with overanalysis. They replay moments long after they pass. They search for meaning even where none exists. Their mind imagines dozens of interpretations for one sentence. Not because they're insecure, but because nuance is the language they speak. This is where metacognition becomes both a blessing and a trap. They don't just think, they think about their thinking. Like standing outside their own mind, observing every pattern, every emotion, every contradiction. It gives them clarity, but also doubt. When you see everything, you also see every flaw magnified, every hesitation, every vulnerability, every truth you can't unsee. Deep thinkers dissect their desires, their fears, their relationships. They ask not just, what do I want, but why do I want it? What would it mean if I achieved it? What would it mean if I didn't? Their mind is an ecosystem of questions, but endless analysis can steal the simple joy of being. They often forget that not everything is meant to be understood. Some moments are meant to be lived, not explained. You'll often find deep thinkers alone, not out of loneliness, but out of necessity. Solitude is where their thoughts can stretch without friction, where they can breathe without feeling the emotional static of the world. On the outside, they may look calm, even distant, but inside, emotions move like tides, quiet, powerful, shaping them in ways no one sees. They revisit old memories as if examining artifacts of who they once were. Not to punish themselves, but to understand the map of their own evolution. They analyze the present, they anticipate the future, they imagine 50 possibilities for every choice.
Their mind exists across timelines. Psychologists call this existential cognition, the ability to think about life, death, meaning, consciousness, the passage of time, not out of anxiety, but curiosity. It's what separates deep thinkers from ordinary overthinkers.
But the same ability to create meaning can also create illusions. When your mind can connect anything to anything, you sometimes connect things that were never meant to touch. A silence becomes a rejection. A pause becomes a threat. A coincidence becomes a sign. It's like having a telescope so strong, you start seeing galaxies in grains of sand. Yet this depth is also the birthplace of creativity. The world's greatest innovations have come from people who refuse to think simply. But in a society obsessed with speed, certainty, and superficial clarity, depth is often misunderstood. Thinking slowly is seen as hesitation. Asking questions is seen as weakness. Complexity is seen as confusion. So deep thinkers hide their depth. They edit themselves to fit into conversations that move too quickly and into environments that value noise over reflection. They smile, they nod, they socialize politely. But their real conversations, the meaningful ones, happen quietly in the back rooms of their mind. And that creates loneliness, not because they lack people, but because they lack resonance. They long for someone who listens between the lines, who understands the world through layers instead of labels. When they finally find someone who shares that depth, they open completely, not half-heartedly, entirely. They offer their hopes, their fears, their inner architecture. But vulnerability is risky, because deep thinkers expect the same honesty they give. And when reality doesn't match their depth, the disappointment cuts deeper. Not because they're weak, but because they invest meaning in everything. Every kindness feels profound. Every hurt feels infinite. This is what psychologists call depth processing, encoding experiences with emotional and symbolic richness. Deep thinkers don't store memories. They store the entire feeling of a moment. That's why nostalgia hits them harder, why a song can return them to an old version of themselves, why they carry people long after they've gone. Their emotional world is detailed, textured. They don't experience emotions in single notes, but in chords. But this sensitivity can be overwhelming. They pick up emotional signals others miss. The tremble in a voice, the hesitation in a breath, the shift in someone's gaze. They absorb tension. They absorb sorrow. They absorb unspoken truth. It's not magic. It's awareness. It's empathy sharpened by pattern recognition. They're detectives of the human heart. But seeing so much makes it hard to ignore contradictions. How society glorifies happiness yet fears authenticity. How people smile while hiding their wounds. How everyone wants to be understood but few want to understand. This is why deep thinkers often turn to art, writing, philosophy, nature. These places make space for questions instead of punishing them. But even in their safe spaces, their mind rarely quiets. Thoughts layer over thoughts, creating internal noise that makes resting difficult. Silence is their sanctuary, but also their amplifier. Rumination becomes their shadow. They seek closure in a world that rarely offers it. They analyze love until it becomes a diagram. They analyze fear until it loses its shape. They analyze life until it becomes something fragile and astonishing. But when they achieve balance, when they allow thought to deepen feeling instead of replacing it, they become extraordinary, a fusion of intellect and empathy, insight and compassion. They see people not as good or evil, but as stories shaped by invisible battles. They forgive easily but learn deeply. They carry lessons like stones smoothed by time.
Their melancholy isn't sadness. It's awareness that everything beautiful is temporary, that every joy has an echo, that every moment is its own kind of miracle. Psychologists call this emotional complexity, the capacity to feel mixed emotions at once. Deep thinkers don't view emotions as obstacles, but as information. Sadness shows what they value. Fear shows what they want to protect. Joy shows what matters. They read life through feeling. And despite their seriousness, many are unexpectedly humorous, because understanding the absurdity of existence creates a special kind of laughter, honest, self-aware, freeing. But most of the time, they feel misunderstood. People assume they're distant, quiet, hard to read, when in truth, they're simply processing the world with more bandwidth than most. When connection fails, they withdraw, not to punish, but to protect the delicate inner world they spend their lives tending. And so they retreat into solitude, where thoughts settle and clarity returns. But thinking without grounding becomes a spiral, so the wisest deep thinkers anchor themselves through creativity, mindfulness, or helping others, anything that connects their inner vision to the outer world. They learn that thinking is only complete when it becomes expression, reflection becomes art, insight becomes empathy, observation becomes wisdom. And one of their greatest strengths is their unwillingness to accept the world at face value. They question traditions, systems, assumptions, not out of rebellion, but compassion. They care enough to ask, is this the best way? Is this true? Does this make sense? But this ability to see all sides makes decisions harder. Empathy becomes a burden when you understand everyone. Still, deep thinkers choose truth over comfort, meaning over approval. If you love a deep thinker, you'll notice their affection hides in curiosity, in listening deeply, in analyzing not to judge, but to understand. They move slowly in trust, but completely in love. They don't fall often, but when they do, they fall with their whole mind and whole heart. Deep thinkers remind us that life is not meant to be rushed, that silence can be sacred, that questions are not signs of doubt, but of wonder. They remind us that understanding the world is less important than cherishing it. So if you're a deep thinker, don't apologize for your quiet. Don't shrink your depth for spaces that fear complexity. Your mind is not a burden, it's a lighthouse. You are not meant to fit in, you are meant to see through, to reveal what others overlook, to find meaning in places most people never look. Deep thinking is not an escape from life, it's a way of honoring it. And in a shallow world, depth isn't just rare, it's a kind of light. If these words met you at the right moment, you can subscribe and stay close. There are more stories waiting.